Thanks, Peter. Hello. Thanks for having me. When I heard that Peter and Adam and friends were organizing this conference, I was really excited, in large part because Books and Browsers, the conferences that started over 10 years ago, were, for me, really meaningful. It was some of the most interesting, inspiring, and fun event that I had in 17 years now in the ebook space. And so thank you for having this event. I still remember many of the great talks from Books and Browsers with Brian and Bill and Adam and many others. And it made me think of all that has happened since then. And so I decided I wanted to take an opportunity to talk about where we are today in terms of books and browsers, and to explore where that might be going. And to understand where we are, I think it is helpful to look at how we got here. It's been a journey. And for me, this journey started in 2005 when Bill McCoy, then at Adobe, hired my company to help his team design and build an ebook platform. It was then that I learned about a file format called EPUB. I found out that EPUB is really just a bunch of HTML in a zip archive. And so obviously we'd be working in the browser. Well, kind of. And I say kind of because there was this little problem, and ebook reader devices needed to be as inexpensive as possible in order to get consumer adoption. And that meant using cheap microprocessors. And it ends up that web browsers are complicated, and they need a lot of processing power and RAM and memory to perform well. And if you've ever tried using a web browser app on one of those early e-reader devices, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about, and it's pretty horrible. And so the software teams, for these types of devices needed to write custom ebook browser software to make it a tolerable experience. And different device teams wrote different software, and that created a problem. And this has vexed ebook creators ever since, where the same fairly basic HTML will render very differently on different devices. Now you might say, Micah, that's ancient history. Well, it's not. Today, 17 years later, that very first custom ebook browser for the Adobe ebook platform lives on in every app that supports Adobe Content Server DRM. And over 2 million ACS ebook licenses are issued to end users every month in 2022. Now, when EPUB 3 came along, it changed the game in terms of how ebook apps were made, because EPUB 3 is essentially HTML5, and this required the much greater sophistication of modern browsers. And no developer in their right mind would try to write a custom modern browser just for ebooks. And so mobile app developers, for example, needed to find ways to incorporate Safari and Chrome into their mobile apps. And that's the approach we took in the first Medium SDK project that we did in 2013. And we had a web server running inside the mobile app, along with the embedded web view. And now there are different ways to push HTML content into an embedded browser. This worked pretty well, especially for video. And that said, in general, there are two downsides to working with embedded browsers in apps. The first one is that for developers, a browser is a bit of a black box, and you don't have the ebook specific hooks. And so you have to make do with what you have. And sometimes that means you have to create solutions that are essentially hacks. And while modern browsers combined with mobile operating systems offer the potential to provide fantastic accessibility, once you embed a browser in an app, and then you inject a bunch of JavaScript code into the DOM, and you put the ebook specific features like paginated reading, and you add a lot of complexity for the various other ebook related features, you find that it very often interferes with accessibility features and of the browsers and operating systems, and which is incredibly frustrating for developers. And it has gotten better in the last couple of years, but there are still challenges to be solved now, today. And one of the good things about this approach was that more ebook tech developers were now working through the issues of how to make ebooks work in modern web browsers. So why even have apps at this point? Why not just always read in the browser? Well, I see 4 key factors there. In retail, there's a psychological component to owning an ebook and downloading it to your device. It's more like a thing that I have. And apps still provide a superior user experience for touch interfaces on mobile, and also they maximize the use of screen real estate. And also reading can take place where there's no internet, like planes, trains, and automobiles. And there's been established DRM tech for apps for a long time now. And in fact, the requirement for DRM has been one of the biggest hurdles of getting books into browsers over the years. Because in the past, web browsers have not had the features that would enable DRM-style features to be implemented. And of what you could implement, there hasn't really been a clear standard for what publishers would accept. And this really did prevent folks from creating browser-based reading systems. Even Bluefire, my company, where our whole business has been creating reading systems for many different companies, when customers would come to us and say, hey, we'd like an online reader, we'd say, well, what are the content protection requirements and what will the publishers accept that you work with? And the problem is no one knew, us included. And so no one wanted to spend the money and time to build a solution without knowing in advance if publishers would be okay with it. And yes, some big players in the space, like Amazon, had browser-based reading systems pretty early on. But publishers tended to buy into that when they did, because Amazon has a very strong market position, to say the least. And not because the publishers were necessarily comfortable with the content protection technologies that were in use, or not, as the case may be. So because of these issues, it wasn't until 15 years into my own ebook tech journey, and a full 10 years after that first Books in Browsers conference, that we had the first chance to build a browser-based ebook reading app just last year. And so in 2021, we partnered with a company called Above the Tree Line to create an online reader for their Edelweiss platform, which is for arcs and galleys, which is particularly sensitive content. And now this last 12 months, we've been building a new online reading platform of our own. So what changed that enabled this to finally happen? With us, at least. A few things. So browser technology has evolved, and modern tools like service workers enable things you just couldn't do before. Publishers' perspectives on DRM are changing a bit, and they still generally want content protection, but they're a little bit more flexible now as to how that is achieved. There's been a lot of consolidation in the market, and it's been pretty intense the last decade. And so publishers are more interested in trying to support new players and new approaches to develop new revenue streams. And publishers have gained a clear sense of what they are asking for in terms of the technical requirements of content protection in browsers. So what are those requirements? Well, much like traditional DRM, encryption is a big part of it in the browser. But also because your reading app is running inside the browser as well, the application code itself is minified and obfuscated in order to be more secure. Now, I'm totally glossing over any discussion here about the pros and cons of DRM in general, as that is a different talk altogether. There's also requirements related to the reader app and its features. similar to mobile and desktop apps, but with some special requirements just for browsers, like how you manage URLs to the content and content fragments. Now, this might all sound pretty easy, but browsers generally are designed to put the user in the driver's seat. So it's actually rather challenging to build. The good news is that most of these reader features I've just described are now part of a free open source project. R2D2BC is maintained by our friend and colleague Averdita Mariki, which unfortunately is not here today, and it is what we are building on for our own platform, Cloud Shelf. Now, you still have to roll your own server-side code, as it really depends on the infrastructure that you use. Like in our case, we use Microsoft Azure. Now, as I was preparing for this talk over the last few weeks, I took a stock of the various companies out there with online readers. And I was pleasantly surprised that most of the big players in public libraries, academic libraries, and retail have all fairly nice online reading solutions in place now. Several of the academic library platforms are Bluefire customers, like EBSCO and ProQuest, and so I took the opportunity to chat with them about how their students, or their customer students, I should say, use browsers versus apps for reading. As you might expect, users tend to use browser-based readers to quickly sample and scan through a variety of different books to find that right resource or to go directly to a known book for a specific bit of data or citation. And in the case where the student anticipates a longer reading session, the student tends to download the file to be read later in an app. Now, this is both due to the offline capability of apps, the ease in finding the work again when they are ready, and generally long format reading is just a nicer experience in apps, to some think. Now, could this general perception that long form reading in apps is more pleasant be a barrier to online reading? One company is testing that idea right now. So Legible is a trade retailer in Canada that has made online reading a core component of its value proposition and differentiation. Consumers buy books and they read them in the browser only. Now, it will be interesting to see how popular this becomes. And speaking of Legible, their founder and CEO, Khalid Hainsworth, is a really fascinating guy. If you ever get a chance to meet him, I highly recommend it. So, as I look around today, I see an environment that I think is ripe for innovation, spurred by books in browsers, because publishers have come to terms with it. Consumers are getting exposed to it more and more, often at an early age in school. The content protection and reading technologies are in place, and much of that tech is free and open source. The difference in cost and time to market compared to deploying and maintaining apps on all platforms is just gigantic. So, what doors does this open? What use cases and business models and opportunities emerge from this? One thing I've been beginning to see is some emergence of what I call micro subscriptions and micro libraries. And by that I mean curated collections of content that share a common topic or a common community or both. And by topic, I mean interests like building hot rods or birding or Persian cuisine or surfing, and also topics like professional topics and industrial. And while communities can be based on shared interests, of course, like cooking or direct marketing, they can also be religious, social, political, and others. And now this can take the form of commercial offerings, such as subscriptions, which people are used to accessing in the browser, but also can be a component added to existing clubs and associations and other types of dues-paying communities, as well as various types of organizations that are more interested in engaging their audience than in monetizing content. One example of that type of use case is content marketing. My take is that books in browsers are perfect for building engagement and community. Jumping into books in browsers is instantaneous and seamless from links in social media, web pages, emails, and texts. Browsers enable direct two-way communication between community members and content providers in the same context that the content is being consumed. And engagement can be easily measured using standard web analytics technologies. And reading longer form content does take time. And in the attention economy, this time and engagement is very valuable. So, what do you think? What will books and browsers, what doors will books and browsers open for you? For your audience. I'd love to hear your ideas, and if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer. Looks like we have 4 minutes remaining. Anyone have a question or a thought about where you think books and browsers are going to impact your life?
I'd like to know what exactly it is you're doing with Legible, or what Books on Bound is.
Repeat question.
I could not hear that.
Okay.
So I
Sorry.
have a mask on.
Hi, I'm just wondering what it is you're doing with Legible and what Books on Bound is all about.
With Legible?
Yeah.
Oh, we have nothing to do. I mean, Legible is not a customer of ours. I just know a colleague and I'm aware of their business. But I think it's quite fascinating, the whole idea of a online retailer that has reading only in the browser.
I was wondering what you would say about, if we're doing books and browsers, you're sort of painting a world where there's still an EPUB behind the scenes that's being processed by this in-browser reading system. I could also see just eliminating the EPUB part of that and directly presenting the content the way a website would. What's the advantages and disadvantages of these approaches?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, I see EPUB largely as a delivery or a transmission platform format. So between the publisher and the provider of the content, that the EPUB is the way in which it comes in so that it's packaged as a file and there's metadata there. In our system, actually, when we package and encrypt the content, we actually explode the zip and store it on the server for a variety of reasons, search and other things that we do on the server side. However, there are systems that, and we have the ability, for example, to open books directly as ebook files of EPUB directly from the file system, either on the server or locally, without having to explode it. You just go in and you do modern web servers allow you to do a range request into a zip file. And so once you read the manifest, essentially, you're able to calculate the data range, and you just pull that compressed data right out and then render it in the browser. So it is some convenience for things where, like Gutenberg, where you might have many millions of books sitting on a server. To be able to not have to pre-process those in any way has some advantages. But in our case, we do actually explode them, so to speak.
You were just mentioning thoughts, and I thought I'd ask on to the question just mentioned, which is my company, Holloway, we publish direct to the web in the same way that you're mentioning, and I would just add on to agreement to your point that you can simply go from sources to a polished web format, and there are customers willing to pay for that, especially if there are other elements of the experience. For example, we embed audio. There's also SEO friendliness of the book, a lot of different aspects. And so I definitely encourage others to know that you were already saying that, but to use a format that's really interesting.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you, everyone. Appreciate your time.